Hi, everyone. Welcome to our AAPI Book Month panel on fandoms and going from fan to creator. I am Akshaya Raman. I'm the author of The Ivory Key, which is a book that's going to come out next year. And I'm very excited to be here with all of these incredible authors. So I'm going to have everyone go around and introduce yourselves, your books, any upcoming releases, and then also talk about any big influences you have for these stories. And we will start with Kat.
Oh, okay, no pressure. I'm Kat Cho, the author of Wicked Fox, and I brought a prop because I never do, but yes. So Wicked Fox is a contemporary fantasy, and it's very, very, very heavily inspired by Korean dramas. And it's also inspired by Korean mythology. I kind of wanted to write a book that felt a little bit like the old paranormal young adult that you might recognize from the early 2000s, but I wanted to give it a K-drama / Korean twist. So it's based on the myth of the Gumiho, which is a 9-tailed fox who's lived for 1,000 years and can now transform into a beautiful girl in order to lure in her prey, which is men, and devour their energy so she can live her immortal life. And my main character is a teenage girl who ends up saving this boy, Ji-hoon, and he finds out her true identity as a Gumiho, and romance and angst and K-drama ensues.
What about
all my favorite things?
What?
What about Vicious Spirits?
Oh, sorry. Yes. Okay. Thank you, Axie. Wow. Vicious Spirits is the companion novel that comes out in August. So it's not out yet, but you could request an arc of it right now. And it is a continuation of the story, but I have 2 new mythological creatures that I discussed. One is the Dokebi, which is the Korean goblin, and the other one is the Josung Saja, which is the Korean reaper. And so, yes, it's a continuation of that.
Okay, do people just want to jump in, or do you want me to call on you?
Call in as teacher. That's what we do.
Okay, all right. Do you want to raise your hands? Okay, all right. We will go to Janella next.
Oh, okay. Hi, I'm Janelle Angeles. I'm the author of Where Dreams Descend, which is also behind me. But it is a YA fantasy. First in a duology where Phantom of the Opera meets Moulin Rouge with a twist of the night circus. And it features an ambitious, powerful showgirl who takes center stage in a magical competition that becomes a dangerous game behind the scenes. And it comes out August 25th from Wednesday Books. And pretty clear from my pitch, very influenced by Phantom of the Opera and Moulin Rouge. So, yeah.
Okay, Elizabeth?
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Lim, and I'm the author of my book, Spin the Dawn, which is a fantasy that's pitched as Mulan meets Project Runway. It's about an imperial tailor who has to sew the dresses of the sun and the moon and the stars. And it was heavily influenced by my love for fairy tales as a kid. There's a bunch of fairy tales in here, including a bunch of fairy tales inspired, including East of the Sun, the Chinese folktale, the Cowherd and the Weaver. And there's it pays homage also to Donkey Skin, which has a princess not sewing, but who has the dresses of the sun and the moon and the sky. I'm also the author of So This Is Love, which I guess harkens to my fandom for Disney. And this is a twisted tale on Cinderella, which begs the question, what if Cinderella never tried on the glass slipper?
Okay, Axie?
Hi, my name is Axie. I'm the author of Rebel Soul and Rogue Heart, which are both YA sci-fi set in a futuristic East Asia. And I think Rebel Souls was pitched as Pacific Rim meets K-dramas, but the main influence is for sure Gundam, the Gundam franchise. And then Rogue Heart was pitched as Warcross meets Final Fantasy. So I guess Final Fantasy here. And then I have an upcoming book called The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea, which is a retelling of a Korean folktale, the tale of Shinchang, and that is Spirited Away influenced for sure.
Okay, and then JJ.
Hi, I'm SJ Jones. I go by JJ. I had to briefly leave my screen for a second to get my books because I realized y'all brought plops and I didn't. But I am the author of Winter Song and the sequel Shadow Song. And these are about a girl named Liesel who's an aspiring composer. And her sister gets stolen away by the Goblin King. So she has to travel to his underground realm to rescue her. And I think very clearly, based on that pitch, you guys can probably guess that this is inspired by the Jim Henson movie Labyrinth with David Bowie and Jennifer. Oh, what's her last name?
Connolly.
Thank you, Jennifer Connelly. These books are pretty much inspired, in large part, obviously, by Labyrinth, but also the '80s movie Legend with Tom Cruise. It's a very like '80s fantasy type of book in terms of like the way I wanted to feel when I wrote it, but also because I am a huge Mozart fangirl, which is why it's set in the time period that it is. The book that I actually tried to write before Winter Song was a retelling of The Magic Flute, which is my favorite of Mozart's operas. And then like maybe halfway through writing that book, I realized I don't actually want to rewrite this because it's the music I like, not actually the story. So then I just put sort of my fandom love for that kind in here. And I'm also the author of it's an upcoming fantasy series that should be out next year called The Guardians of Dawn. It's a fantasy series set in East Asian inspired world. And it's 4 books, and each book is inspired by a different fairy tale. So Cinderella, Beauty and the Beast, Little Red Riding Hood, and Snow White. So, and that one is I pretty much pitched it to my editor as being very much Sailor Moon influenced and also Avatar: The Last Airbender. So that's me.
Those are all great things, all things that I love and that a lot of people love. So very excited. Okay, so let's start by talking about like your first fandom. So, you know, what drew you to it? How did you engage? Tell us about your teenage fan fiction.
I feel like Akshay is looking directly at Janella.
I know, I'm
scared. All right, Janella, tell us about your teenage fan fiction.
Oh my God, this is an attack right now. So, okay, I feel like I have to backtrack because the way I was drawn to the Harry Potter fandom was kind of a strange story that has to do with fan fiction. So my biggest fandom is like when I first grew up was Harry Potter. Primarily, I loved writing Marauders fanfic. I'm wearing a Marauders map t-shirt right now, represent. But when I was younger, I didn't really grow up reading the Harry Potter series like most people did. I came about it in a very roundabout way in which the 3rd movie, Prisoner of Azkaban, came out. And I saw a trailer for it. And you know how sometimes when they edit trailers, they'll make you think it's one story when it's actually another?
Yes.
So do you guys remember in Prisoner of Azkaban when like Draco like gives Harry a note with like that's like in the shape of a bird and he like blows out like a kiss?
Oh yeah,
that's a very hetero way to send a note in class. So for some reason the trailer cut from Draco to Hermione, and I was like, in my head I'm like, what? Draco and Hermione? That's wild. And so I took to the internet, Googled Draco and Hermione, ended up on a Draco and Ginny fanfic, and I was like, wow, like what's happening in Harry Potter? And it like never occurred to me that like what fan fiction actually meant. I thought that it was like people were writing their own interpretations of what was going on in the book, not like reimagining things to how they wished. So my first exposure to Harry Potter was through fan fiction, me thinking naively that it was real, but quickly realized it wasn't real. So I fell into reading Harry Potter through fan fiction, and I read them both alongside, which was interesting because I had a lot of weird expectation for ships that never happened, of course. But yeah, I became obsessed with it, and I became especially attached to the Marauders era because I felt like that was a really unexplored kind of time. You get kind of like glimpses and hints of it in the books. And the Marauders just sound like really funny teenagers. So I wrote a lot of fanfic where they get into like a lot of hijinks. I have like Peter Pettigrew mysteriously absent in all of them for some reason. For some reason, he's somewhere. Yeah, that was basically my fandom story, and that's how I got into writing in the first place. So
I'm going to say that one of the biggest fandoms that I was a part of was Sailor Moon, only because of how many different ways I interacted with it. I feel like there were things that I felt deeper emotions for, if that makes sense. But Sailor Moon, like, I interacted with it. Like, I read fan fiction. Sailor Jupiter was my favorite Sailor Scout. And I really, really wanted her to have a love line. And there's one episode where it's like an old childhood friend of hers comes back. It's like Shinozaki comes back, and like she has to like save him from like the evil people who come to suck out energy. But I was like, oh, well, they're going to fall in love. And then he just never comes back again. But I found a fan fiction of the two of them like going off on adventures together. And it was one of those old websites where every time you opened it, like a song would start playing.
Oh, yeah. Like a GeoCities website or something.
Yeah.
Like that. It's a part of a ring. Like at the bottom, it's like a link to the next website.
Yeah. And it was her sad theme song, Rainy Day Man.
Rainy Day. So good.
Like, I like knew that song front and backwards because I would spend hours and hours reading this fan fiction, would play on loop over and over again. And then my friends and I in middle school, we were each a different Sailor Scout. Obviously, I was Jupiter, but I had a friend who was like Sailor Moon and Sailor Mercury and Sailor Venus. Nobody wanted to be Sailor Mars. And I feel so bad now looking back. But
that's my favorite. She's
my favorite.
Yeah, she's the one that I feel the most affinity toward is Mars.
Yeah. I think it's because she was like the most intense sometimes. And like we didn't know how to process that as like girls growing up in a society that was very like patriarchal and heteronormative, but that's a different story. Anyway, so like we created one of those notebooks. I don't know if you guys ever did this, where it's like you write one page of like the story and you pass it on to the next person, and then they'd write the next. Mm-hmm. So we would write our Sailor Moon fan fiction by passing it back and forth between periods. And so like first period, I would have it, second period, like my friend Becca would have it. And the next period, like my friend Erin would have it. And so we'd each write like a different page of this fanfic story that went on for like 2 years, I think.
So you guys still have it?
I don't think I still have that.
Oh.
No, I know, it's so sad. And we'd also write messages to each other as Sailor Scouts. So I'd be like, Sailor Mercury, when you read this, like meet me at the cafeteria.
Oh, that's really cute.
I was,
That's adorable.
So I interacted with Sailor Moon a lot. So
me too. That was my pick too, Sailor Moon.
What Sailor Scout did you
Did I like?
Yeah.
I really liked Mars, but I also liked Mercury because she studied hard and it felt very Asian. So like, it's like, oh, I'm gonna go home and study.
You kind of in like your sweet temperament, you remind me of a Sailor Mercury.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess I'll go next. I also wrote a lot of Sailor Moon fanfic. That was probably my first fan fiction that I ever dared to post online. It was like the most horrifying thing. I had a whole like avatar and everything in a fake name and like a fake email address that I set up in middle school so that I could check like fan mail. I didn't get very much, but it was just like, but yeah, it was a really fun experience. I think it taught me a lot about how to write, actually. But it was actually my sister who was the huge Sailor Moon fan at first. She's a lot younger than me, so she was like, I don't know, 5. And I would just sneak in and watch it with her and be like, oh, Mom, I'm just taking care of her, you know. But then I got really obsessed too. So then I would spend like all my nights on the site that I went to, I still remember, is called A Sailor Moon Romance, ASMR.
I've been there.
Yes, I love it so much. Oh my gosh.
I feel like I think I'm the oldest person here, I think. So I may have like literally been part of every single fandom that you guys are going to talk about. Anyway, continue.
Yeah, so I looked at the site recently and they only have like, I don't remember the letter, but I think it was like A through E archived. I was really sad because my name started with an S.
Oh.
Yeah, but yeah, I would write my stories and put them on little floppy disks and then upload them.
That's
Yeah.
amazing.
It was really fun. And the stories that I did were actually kind of similar to the ones that I write now. I put all the Sailor Scouts as like mermaids for The Little Mermaid. And I retold them then. And then I did like a Swan Lake kind of one. They're wild swans. And yeah, I would love to read them again and see how awful they are.
It's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't write fan fiction, so I feel like, what am I doing here? But the way I like dove into loving things was making collages. So like with Sailor Moon, I would go on those geosite websites or whatever, and I would print out, like, use up all the ink on my parents' printer, and I would just make I would cut out their faces and like make little collages of like, and I would put like Serena and Darian next to each other. And, like, I would draw like a sparkle heart, and I would also like print out their bios. And I guess maybe it was like I was like really into like believing everything was canon that was like in these like websites. Like, okay, if she's like this age, then she's this age. Like even if there was no research involved, I just believed it. And I would print out their bios and I'd keep it in a folder and I would bring it with me to school. And so that's just how I engage with my fandoms. I would make collages, but I didn't really write any, and the only ones I read were Gundam Wing, like sexy ones.
Yeah, always the spicy ones, right? It's always the spicy fanfic.
Yeah.
Well, I have such a long history with fandom. I don't even know where to begin. My very first fandom, you guys are gonna laugh, it was the X-Files.
Okay.
Yeah,
Awesome.
so like OG, not quite, because like really OG fan fiction writers, I think, belong to Star Trek. But and I wasn't around for like the original series or anything, but I was probably like 9 or 10 when I was like reading X-Files fan fiction, and it was back in the day where you had to go to like Usenet boards. Like you didn't even have like websites. But the term shipping actually originates from the X-Files fandom, because there was a huge divide between people there were like 3 different camps. There were people who called themselves, you guys are gonna laugh, no romos, or no romance between Mulder and Scully. And then there were people who were really into UST, which was unresolved sexual tension.
Yeah.
And then there was a huge number of people, myself included, that was a relationshipper, which got shortened over time to shipper. And then shipping is actually where it comes from. So yeah, like I remember the rise of this term that it just proliferated around completely like all around the internet ever since then. So that was probably my very first fandom that like I was like on the internet for. And I think I wrote an X-Files fanfic when I was like maybe 10. It's hilarious. I don't know where it is. I don't even think I knew what on earth I was writing about. But so that was my very first. And then after that was probably Sailor Moon was a huge thing for me too, because I did read Sailor Moon fan fiction. I wrote one where it was the girls are in like an American high school, and so was Mamoru, and they put on a production. I think it was like Much Ado About Nothing, and then like Usagi and Mamoru as Beatrice and Benedict. So that's somewhere on the internet, I am sure. And if you guys come across that, it's me, and I'm not gonna own to it, but maybe. And then Harry Potter was actually the next, probably the longest running like fandom that I was a part of. I also wrote a lot of Harry Potter. Like it's funny when Kat said that she had this notebook that she would pass between her and her friends. My friend and I did that, but for Harry Potter fan fiction, where I wrote Harry and she wrote Draco. So we like pass it back and forth. in like a sort of fanfic version of the Exquisite Corpse game. I don't know if it's one where you like fold pieces of paper and then you draw part of it and then you like hand it over to the next person. Yeah, the game is called Exquisite Corpse. So that was that. But like my other fandom bits were also like I drew a lot of fan art. Like most of my fan fiction was fan art. So speaking of Harry Potter again, I don't know if you guys ever read the Shoebox Project, which was a Marauders era like fan fiction, but had like a lot of art attached to it. I was like really inspired by this fan fiction called the Shoebox Project. And so like I drew a bunch of Marauders fan art kind of in that style. It looks like you found like photographs of like James and Sirius and Remus and everybody. But like the other thing that I was like really obsessed with at the time was a movie called Velvet Goldmine, which is like it's a Todd Haynes movie, and it's like talk about fan fiction. It's like a gay boys fanfic of what David Bowie would have been like if he was, I don't know, like in love with Iggy Pop. So it's like set in the early 1970s England, and it's like very glam rock influence. So I like drew all this Marauders fan fiction, like fan art with like them dressed in like glam rock clothes.
Oh my gosh, I love this.
So yeah, like a lot of my fandom did come out in an art sort of a way, because I also had all of the old Tokyo Pop translations of the Sailor Moon manga. So for a very long time, my art style looked a lot like Naoko Takeuchi's. Like it was very flowing, very feminine. I took a lot of that and like tried to draw my own manga and everything, which was kind of hilarious. I still have it somewhere, and it's really bad. It's like literally over there. I'm not going to get it to show you guys. It's terrible. So like my fandom sort of, I just have a fangirl love of anything that I'm really into. So I tended to produce a lot of fan content in that way. So like literally, if you've named the fandom, I've probably been part of it in one way or another. Like there's like no fandom untouched by me.
It's amazing.
I love that.
I feel like a lot of I don't know if you guys felt the same way, but like a lot of things that I became obsessed with was because it made me feel a little bit seen. I think that's why I really loved anime, because like especially because like there were so many like such Asian imagery in it. Like even though like the buildings could have been anywhere, like the food they ate was definitely Asian, and like they would bow, to their elders and stuff like that. Like I loved Dragon Ball Z, and I loved Gundam Wing. Axie and I loved it together. I read a lot of Trunks fan fiction. I don't know if you know that character because he's a little bit later on, but like he like shows up from the future as like a teenager, and he was like for my like 11-year-old heart, I was like, he's so attractive. And I read a lot of fan fiction, and then but then as the storyline goes on, he goes back to the future, and then he's born because he's from the future, and so then he's a baby, and then you feel weird for like having been attracted to this guy because now he's a baby. And so
it's like the Terminator, isn't it? Like
yeah, it's a little because he comes back to like change something that if it happens, the future is ruined. So he does that, and then so I don't want to like ruin it in case anyone wants to watch that part of Dragon Ball Z. But like, yeah, I loved a lot of anime because I grew up mostly in Central Florida, and I was like, the only thing that I get is
Toonami.
I was gonna say
the Toonami lineup. Very influential.
I would get was the Toonami lineup. Yeah. So.
Actually, the thing that I loved best from Toonami that I feel like no one else knows or remembers is Reboot. That was the show
I totally remember Reboot.
I've read so much Reboot fan fiction like you would not believe.
It's so random. That is the most random fan fiction.
I love that show, and this is like the thing. It's like at least the Toonami lineup that I remember when I was probably like 11 or 12, I think, was like Sailor Moon was at 4. So I was always home to watch Sailor Moon. 4:30 was Reboot. 5 o'clock was Dragon Ball Z, which is actually the one that I skipped because I didn't really care. Like I know Dragon Ball, like Goku is actually inspired by an East Asian trickster figure, the Monkey King. In Korean, it's called Sonogong. And I only realized that when I picked up like a manga in Korean of Dragon Ball, and I saw that his name was Sonogong, and I was like, oh, that makes sense now. Like he goes around on a flying cloud. He has an extendable pole and like all this sort of stuff. I was like, oh, that makes sense. And a tail, yeah. But I skipped Dragon Ball Z because I didn't really care, and then because they would spend like 9,000 episodes on one battle, and I was like, okay, come on, like just don't care. And then after that, because the fourth show in like the 5:30 slot would always kind of change her up, but the other one that I really liked was The Real Adventures of Johnny Quest, which like
that was so random.
It was so random, and they only had 2 seasons of it. Like, and I could have sworn there were like 800 bazillion more episodes, but they only had 2 seasons of that show. So.
Oh my goodness, it's amazing.
Yeah, I remember waiting forever for the new season of Sailor Moon to come out.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, like are Serena and Darren going to get back together, or like did he forget his memory forever?
Well, the thing about the Sailor Moon, because the original, I think it was Vic or something like that. That was like the production company that translated it. They didn't want to get into the super season, right? The ones where we finally meet Uranus, Neptune, and Saturn, because I think they didn't know what to do with the fact that these girls were lesbians, and we're Americans and we're not okay with that, I guess. And I just remember being so excited they'd finally dubbed those and brought those to the United States, and then they turned Uranus and Neptune into cousins.
That was so weird.
Inexplicably left all the flirting in there, so it was worse. So now they were flirty cousins. I was like, oh no.
Yeah, they were very, it was very strange. I remember like, because it was so piecemeal how they like released the those versions in the United States, that like I had a good idea of who Pluto and Saturn were, and they were the outer scouts that interested me the most. So I definitely wrote fan fiction of them like destroying worlds together.
In the old days, I used to go to like the anime video store and then like get like the fan subs, because that's like the only way I could see a lot of those like the later stuff. So like I think the American names for like Uranus and Neptune were like Amara and Michelle or something like that, but I never refer to them that way because I only ever watched the fan subs of those seasons.
That's smart.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so I love all of that, and I love like JJ's like fandom history like lesson. That was very informative. But so I want to transition a little bit to from your fandoms, like how did you go like start creating your original stories and sort of your process in evolving your own style, while still like, you know, having those influences from those things that you loved. And again, anyone who wants to jump in can do that.
I think I've always
okay, all right. I will call on people.
Yeah, JJ was going.
I was gonna say,
okay, yeah, JJ, go ahead.
I've always created my own stuff, like my own original fiction and my own original artwork and everything like that. But fan fiction was an extension of, I don't have enough of this and I want more. And because there isn't more, I'm going to create more. Or it was a corrective thing, because I wrote Lord of the Rings fan fiction too, but I stuck more female characters in there because I was like, there's only 3. You know, so like that kind of a thing. Or I wrote a lot of Harry Potter fan fiction from Cho Chang's point of view, because I was like, she's like the only East Asian character here that I can like vaguely identify with, although what kind of name is Cho Chang?
I was gonna say, did you fix her name?
I gave her like some like history, and it's like short for something I don't even remember, but I did write a lot of like you know, like that was a way for me to engage with the material, because I was like, well, I'm not here, so I'm going to put myself in here. And then there was just like, but a lot of my fan creations just come from, I like it, I want more of it, or I like it, I want to explore this aspect of it. That like basically all of my like all of the Mulder and Scully fan fiction that I ever read were basically just like a regular episode of the X-Files. These people were really great. I hope a lot of them actually turned out to be professional thriller writers because they'd be really good at it. But like, you know, like it's like a regular case, but there's like romance in it, or like, or just like for a period, I'm sure many girls did the same. Like I was really into Jane Austen, so I wrote like a lot of Regency romances before I knew what a Regency romance was, and like, you know, tried to affect that sort of like free and direct discourse style of writing. So I think a lot of my fandom writing back then was just playing. That's what it feels like to me. Like a lot of fandom is just playing in somebody else's sandbox. But I've always written my own stuff alongside that. So a lot of that playing was just either just me letting go and having fun and not caring, but I did learn a lot. I don't know about the rest of you guys, but like I learned a lot writing fan fiction. Like I learned what I liked to write, what I didn't like to write, what I wanted to read, what I didn't want to read. It's a lot of practice. And so, you know, that's kind of where I started. So someone else jump in.
Yeah, I agree.
Oh
wait, no, you go, Kat. You say first.
I was gonna say, like, I really liked your answer of like writing what you wish was there or writing how you wish it had played out, because what I used to do when I was younger was that I would act out some of my favorite scenes from my shows or my books with like my little stuffed animals instead of going to bed, because I was like, I'm not tired. So instead I'd like make my 2 stuffed animals act out my favorite scene. But then eventually I started like changing the scenes and being like, it would be better if like this fight happened or this happened. And so I didn't realize that I was like doing my own weird play acting fan fiction. Because then eventually I did write it down. And then the other way that I did things was that this is a weird way for it to come about, but my sister played Final Fantasy a lot. And I loved watching her play. It was like really entertaining for me somehow to watch her play video games. And when Final Fantasy got really good with like its graphics and like a lot of its like introductory scenes were like actual like CGI movies, I would watch those even without her. I would like just put the disc in and I would watch the introductory scene over and over and over and over and over again, and then just like stop it when it came to the time to like make your own avatar. And I would always be like, I wonder what happens next. And so I wrote like what I thought happened next in Final Fantasy because I was too lazy to play it myself and figure it out. So
I love this so much, actually.
It's the weirdest way to be a fan of Final Fantasy because like I never fully played a game. Like my sister tried to teach me how to play and I was like, it's taking too long. I would just rather write my own story. And so, yeah, I wrote like fanfic of the one where he plays that weird sports game in that big arena and then he gets taken to another world.
Final Fantasy 10.
Yeah, I did one of Final Fantasy 10. I did one of the girl who has like the feathers in her hair and there's a lot of feather imagery. Like I don't even know the names of them, but like I would write fan fiction of them weirdly. And it was like I had to write my own things because like the only thing I knew was like the prologue, and it kind of like helped me figure out like why I liked like the setup that they had, and then eventually I like started writing my own stories without Final Fantasy.
All right, Janelle.
Okay. I really like what JJ said about, you know, fan fiction is really a lot like playing in someone else's sandbox. I definitely had a lot of fun with fan fiction in that way because it felt like, you know, it's just pure joy when you write fan fiction. Like there are very low stakes, no pressure. It's really for yourself. It's all anonymous. So it's like, it really is sort of the best way to get your writing out there and to start practicing and getting your feet wet a little bit without, you know, without the weird stuff that comes when you get, you know, later down in the publishing journey. But to go back to the question.
Liz has a visitor.
Is there a child? Yay!
BBC Dad!
Yeah. It's why in the very beginning of this video, I was a little frazzled because I heard her shouting.
Oh my God. Oh my God, what was my point? Oh, okay. Yeah, I was going to go back to the original question of like, how did you transition to creating original stories? Because fan fiction was such a huge like piece of me when I was growing up. Like, I wasn't a particularly smart child or athletic or good at anything, but fan fiction I was very good at. I felt like it was my thing. No one else in my family could claim it. It was like that thing for me. So when it came to writing original stuff, it was really hard for me. I was really scared to start writing original stuff, weirdly, because I'd become so comfortable in this sandbox. I knew the Marauders way too well. I could throw them into like the weirdest situations and it would somehow work in my head. But around that time, I was like a young teenager, and I started just reading a lot of young adult. And I knew instantly I wanted to write young adult. But the transition to get to writing original stuff was really difficult. I remember a lot of my attempts were like, ooh, maybe I can write a Lily and James fanfic, but like change their names afterwards. And like that never worked. And then I was like, maybe I can write
50 Shades.
I mean, they had a method. It didn't work for me. And I was like, maybe if I write
Also,
fan
like,
fiction,
50 Shades is like Twilight AU, alternate universe, right?
Yeah.
So like there was already like 1 degree of removal, so she could just file off the serial numbers.
Yeah, I like for some reason that just never worked for me. I like could only get so far with like different people's names, and I was like, nope, this isn't Lily and James. I need to go back. But then I think the more I started reading other stuff and consuming other media, because I read a lot of fan fiction, that it's like the more you read of something, it just like takes up such residence in your mind. So I started reading more YA, more other things, and I think that's where I started to develop my own ideas, even though like my first YA was very derivative of what was going on. So it's like you're still kind of stealing from like what everyone's writing. But weirdly, I feel like my fanfic voice is very different from my current writing voice, because when I wrote fanfic, I had more of like a snarky, contemporary, humorous tone, and that is not what Where Dreams Descend is at all. Like fantasy, lyrical. So it's interesting to think of me as a writer then and me now.
Yeah, like I guess what you guys were saying earlier about how an aspect of something will inspire you to write something else. Like that really was part of how I started originally creating things, because I would, like with Final Fantasy, like in Final Fantasy VIII, there's this whole side character and scene where there's this like lounge singer, and it's like this whole, I think it's like the parents of the main characters. It's like this whole like side story, and like the theme song of the game is from that side story. And so when I was writing Rogue Heart, I was sort of taking all these little pieces of things that I love from other things, like the whole idea of like a lounge singer in a bar, and then in the distance there's someone watching you that like is always shows up just for your set, like things like that, like was like, oh, that's so romantic to me. And then so it's sort of like a magpie, like taking the little things from like different like other creators have made, not like not like stealing or anything, well maybe, but like like gathering bits and pieces of like from other things that you love, but also from your dreams or from other books and stuff like that. Like whenever I write a book now, I actually list out all of the inspirations. So like with Rogue Heart, I put like Final Fantasy VIII, specifically the theme song. I put IU, the K-pop singer, because her whole album palette was just like so aesthetic for me. And so yeah, so now that's what I do now. It's like I sort of like have all these different like images, all these different little things that I pull from different places, and I keep in the back of my brain until like a spark ignites that is a full story, and then I can use all of those things that I loved into a story that's completely original. So like that's sort of like how I do it now.
I'm gonna listen to Palette now while I read Rogue Heart.
My journeys into writing original stories is actually pretty roundabout. For most of my life, probably since the age of 5, I actually wanted to become a classical composer and film scoring composer. So I spent almost all of my free time working on composing music, and writing was really just like a secondary hobby that I turned to, like, to just like veg out in front of the computer and read fan fiction. But as I got a little older, I started writing, I guess, what you would call programmatic music, because I thought it would be good practice for becoming a film scorer. And basically, it's music that has like a narrative, and I needed a narrative. So one of my teachers like suggested that I write stories to go along with the music, and they were really short, like simple stories at first, but then they kind of grew more and more. And eventually, like in grad school, I wrote my first real novel, because I was working on an opera and I needed text to go with it. And I was like, hey, I'm in grad school. I don't have that much to do. So I'm just going to write the text to go with this. And I really fell in love with the process. It reminded me of how much fun I had as a kid writing fan fiction. And so that's how I started writing my own original stories more. So pretty roundabout, but
That's amazing.
Yeah, I love that.
That's so cool. Oh my gosh. Okay. So I actually want to talk a little bit about the influences that you have, like that are specific to your books. So whether that's, mythology or history or music, or, theater, movies, what was it about those specific things that really, that drew you to them, that made you want to engage with that, not just as a fan and not just like, listen to that music or watch that movie, but like interpret it and engage with it as a creator?
I'm not gonna lie, Axe, because you said earlier that you were gonna skip a question.
Did you ignore this one?
Kat specifically told me that you had written down an answer to this question, so I wanted to give Kat the chance to answer. So Kat, why don't you?
Okay, because you told me that you're gonna skip it, that was my answer. I was like, you know what? I'm preempting.
Okay, so actually already answered. Oh my gosh. Okay, I will go because I forced you to include this question. So things that influence Wicked Fox specifically, I can't speak anymore. It's actually really interesting because I do think that when I first started writing Wicked Fox, like I really wanted to write like a school K-drama, like a very high school K-drama. But then as I got more into it, I realized like the paranormal part of it was like such a huge part, and it like demanded to be explored way more. So instead of writing like a school K-drama with like a speculative twist, I ended up writing kind of like an equal mashup of a paranormal romance and a school K-drama. And in a lot of ways, like I think that the reason why that was something that I couldn't ignore was because I did really enjoy a lot of paranormal romances when I was younger. And like I feel like my feelings about that time in my life, like, what am I even saying, are interesting because like I was able to embrace like loving story and loving storytelling so much through like reading books like Twilight, to be fair, like because it made me feel things that I can still kind of like viscerally remember to this day. Even though like now when I look back on it, I can understand that there's some things about Twilight that are a little bit problematic. So I think that when I realized that like I was so highly influenced by paranormal romance of that time, I also decided that I kind of wanted to unpack part of it. I wanted to tell like a paranormal romance story where like there is an obvious power imbalance in the relationship, and the power imbalance doesn't play into like a toxic patriarchal like heteronormative thing. And definitely one of the cheats for that was to make the girl the more powerful one. And then also like on the similar part of that coin was I definitely think that there's a lot of Korean mythology where if the paranormal creature is female, she's just definitely evil. And it's just like, why though? Like, why is the Gumiho evil in Korean mythology? Like, there's no reason given why she has to be evil. And like, it really actually upset me when I learned that in like Japanese and Chinese mythology, the nine-tailed fox can be benevolent. I was like, this is BS, you guys. So it's definitely, Wicked Fox was almost my way of like unpacking a lot of my own angsty feelings through writing an angsty book. If that makes sense. I don't even know if I'm even answering the question anymore. But okay, I'll just name like 3 things that definitely influenced it. The manga / K-drama Orange Marmalade, which is about a girl vampire who goes to school. And Oh My Ghostess, which is a K-drama about, and it had a lot of shamans and like ghosts and stuff like that in it. And then like authors that I really like that I thought did paranormal fairly well and like kind of started to unpack some toxic masculinity that's folded into that genre sometimes is Bridget Kemmerer. Does it really well, I think. And I really like Jennifer Ermintrout series. So yes, that was a long answer. I'm sorry.
It's interesting when you ask us like why we engage with certain things, because I think I told you that what I wrote before Winter Song was me attempting to rewrite the Magic Flute and then realizing that no, it's actually the music of the Magic Flute that I like and not the story. Even though I like the story, it's a really kind of simple fairy tale, really, but like I really wasn't all that interested in that. So then I had to take my love of Mozart's music and I wanted to do something with that. But it's really, it's like I was writing Winter Song. I wrote it for NaNoWriMo, and I was talking to Marie Lu at the time, and I was basically like, I'm just going to write this thing that I don't really care about making good. Like, I just want to write something like really trashy, like 50 Shades of Labyrinth. And then like, that's kind of where it comes from. But like over the course of writing this book, the things that already interested me sort of started to come together. I really love Hades and Persephone as like a myth and a story, and that sort of came into it. It's sort of like, there's an underworld, obviously, and there's a king of the underworld, and sort of a life, death, birth, rebirth kind of a cycle that seems to be natural there. And then because I had set this in late 18th century Bavaria, there's a mythological figure, the Urkenich, which is also the name of a piece by Schubert. So it's like a lot of those things that I was already interested in just started to come into what I was writing, because and it's almost like I'd been doing my entire life, had been living my entire life researching for it, which is not actually true. It's just that I had all of these interests. Mm-hmm. And the story that I was writing just happened to be able to draw all those influences together. There was I put in like Little Red Riding Hood. It was an extra that I gave away in my newsletter. But I annotated both Winter Song and Shadow Song with like specific scenes and lines that I said, this was inspired by this. Like there's a scene that's inspired by a scene from the Book of Three by Lloyd Alexander. It's actually when they go to the realm of the Fearful for the first time. Or this description of the underground is really heavily inspired by the fairy world in Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. These are all just things that I liked aesthetically that I just sort of collected and kind of made its way into the books that I had been writing. So I think that's just kind of what it is. Like the Guardians of Dawn series that I'm writing right now is also actually quite heavily influenced by Korean dramas, but like and specifically like historical Korean dramas, but the more modern kind. So they're like really, really kind of more cute and more rom-com-y. Like I really loved one. It's called Moonlight Drawn by Clouds.
Yes.
It's so cute. And I loved that. And that was like, so I drew a lot of what I took from those was this sort of, it's a historical setting, but it still has sort of like a romantic comedy sensibility. And I liked that. And I was, I brought that in. A lot of fairy tales I also bring in because I liked them. I still do. I love sort of archetypal stories. So they will find its way into my work, conscious or not. There's another thing that I really, really love is Dragon Age and Mass Effect. These are two video games from the company BioWare, and there's like lines and stuff in my current book that's just like lifted directly from both games, because I was just like, it's just gonna find its way in here. Like, and if you guys play Dragon Age at all, you will probably be like, yeah, this is very, very
I
inspired.
played Dragon Age Inquisition right before I wrote Spin the Dawn. And I mean, there's not a ton of influence there, but some of the feels that I got, I definitely like inserted into the book.
Yeah, I honest to God, like I had not, since I started writing professionally, and even before that, probably like since maybe a little bit after college, I kind of stopped reading as much fan fiction as I used to when I was like in high school and college. But like I had just finished Shadow Song and I was so burned out, and I was like, I can't engage with anything. Like I can't watch a movie, I can't watch a TV show, I can't read a book right now. I'm so burned out. And so Susan Dennard was actually like, well, you should play Dragon Age Inquisition. And I was like, okay. Look at where I am now. Like, but I was like, after I played those games, it was like the first time I was like, in a long time, I was like, I gotta read some fan fiction. I'm like, I need more.
It's a good game. Highly recommend.
Highly, very good.
To go off with what JJ said about how you wrote Winter Song as like a 50 Shades of Labyrinth, that's kind of how I actually approached Where Dreams Descend. I was like, I'm just going to write something that feels like fan fiction. And like, even with the comp titles, Phantom of the Opera meets Moulin Rouge, it sounds like a fanfic. Like, that's because it kind of is. And I think like essentially like when you think of fan fiction, it's like the question of what if this character did that? And that's where Dreams Descend came from, because Phantom of the Opera has always been a huge like thing for me since I was growing up. Like the music was always around me. My family always played like the CD like all the time. So I always knew in the back of my head I wanted to write like a Phantom of the Opera-esque story. I just didn't know what to intersect it with. But eventually, like the more I started playing around with like, what if instead of like Christine, who is this like beautiful, talented, you know, performer, what if instead of her being scared, what if she actually owned her talent and was really ambitious about it? What if there was more to the story behind these two guys in the love triangle? What if they actually had lives apart from trying to get Christine a concept?
Impossible.
Impossible. So yeah, I feel like engaging with it as a fan, like you kind of just start asking these questions and stories are born from there. Just how Where Dreams Descend essentially came about as a seed.
I love how you put it like that. And like, obviously you're backing off of JJ. It just like makes me think of like every moment where I had issues when I was writing Wicked Fox was because now looking back in hindsight, is because I was taking myself too seriously. I was like, I want to be published. I want to be a published author. Like I have to hone my craft and I have to like plot this tightly and everything has to have like triple reasons for why I'm doing it and imagery and stuff. And so when I was writing Vicious Spirits, I kind of was just, I literally said to myself, I was like, I'm going to write it like Vicious Spirits is fan fiction of Wicked Fox. Like what would I as a fan want these characters to do next? And it made that process for book 2 so much easier because I stopped taking myself so seriously, which was nice.
It's a good tip, Kat.
Taking all the pressure off yourself, you know, when you're like, this is just like fan fiction. Because the thing is, it's like writing original stuff. I consider it a good day if I can like eke out like 1,500 words, right? Like that's a good day for me. But I could probably, no lie, write like 10,000 words of fanfic in a day. Like, because there isn't the same amount of pressure to make it good, right? Like it's just joy. Like you're just there, you're like, I'm playing with these characters, and so all these words are coming out, as opposed to sometimes when you're with your original stuff, you sort of sit there and you're like, okay, I need them to do this, and then it like you don't worry about that, when you're writing like a coffee shop AU or something. You're just like, they're just here for no reason. They're just in a coffee shop having a conversation. There doesn't need to be a reason. They're just there.
Yeah.
So kind of talking about something a little bit different. So like, these days social media has really blurred the lines between like fan and creator and like the access that you have to creators. So I'm kind of curious to hear like how you feel things have changed for you as a fan because of that, and also like how fans have engaged with you as a creator.
Well, I can definitely speak to like the top part of that question more, because I feel like even things like this, like a panel like this, I really appreciate, because when I engage now with creators, it's about their process. That's what I want to know. I don't want to know about their lives, honestly. Like, I'd rather not know, actually. The less about their lives I know, I'm happier. But about their process is just so inspiring to me as a creator. So like panels like this, like Kat's podcast, like Clarabelle, like things like that, like JJ's podcast, like those sort of things where it's like about process, about industry, about the things that I'm interested in. That's the kind of stuff I really like. And you can obviously send in questions like for panels like this, or for podcasts, or for Twitter, you can ask questions and stuff. And that's the kind of stuff that I really like, more than being like, what are they wearing today? Which is fine. Like, I think that's fine too. Like, being like a fan in that way too is totally fine. But that's just sort of how I like to engage.
I'm never going to tell you about my life again, actually.
It's interesting because like I feel like I had a much better relationship with some creators before I found out what they were like on social media. J.K. Rowling.
Yeah.
Not looking at you.
She's going to watch this panel.
I know, exactly. That was hard for me. And I think people are still coming to terms with that, in that like this is a thing that was hugely formative in our lives growing up, and then you find out that the person who created it is maybe not as great as you thought, or or like, how do you separate your own relationship with the work to your relationship to your idea of the person who created it? That was kind of hard for me to navigate. I had the same thing about Orson Scott Card, actually, because I really loved the Underbooks in particular. And I read them all before I found out kind of what a bigot he is. And, so it's like still, and, now I come to the point too, where I'm like, I'm old enough now to be like, this is something that was formative to me, that meant a lot to me, that I did take away a lot from. The same thing with Mists of Avalon. Like, Marion Zimmer Bradley was a monster, but at the same time, I cannot deny that those books had a huge effect on me. I'm not going to go around defending these books to people. I'm not going to go around trying to defend the author, but I'm not going to downplay what they meant to me. I think that was really difficult. As far as myself, I don't really think of myself as being interesting enough to have a fandom around me. And I like it that way. Like, I'm not interested in being friends with my readers. Like, I'm really grateful for having readers at all, and I love to talk to them about the books that they read, not even my stuff, just like the books that they read, what they like, what they're engaged with. But I don't need to be everybody's friend. And that's the other thing, that I sometimes feel like there's pressure, because no matter what, if you're a published author, you're a public figure. It's just, you are in public. That is what it is. So, you look at people's Instagrams, or you look, like celebrity Instagrams, and it's always this kind of carefully curated version of their life. And I don't share a lot of my life with people on social media. I don't want to. I like keeping that for me. So I only really share, or at least I try to share, only what interests me. So even things on like Twitter, if you ever follow me, it's like 80% Dragon Age. Because that's what I want to engage with. I don't need people to engage with me as a person or a creator even. I just want to engage about the things that I like. So that's kind of the line where I draw. I also don't want to be somebody's J.K. Rowling. Like, that was really a huge, huge problem for me.
Yeah, that was like a cultural shock for us all, I think.
Yeah, that was hard.
I feel like it still never ends too, because there's still new content being like produced in Pottermore. I feel like I stopped paying attention to it because I kind of want to keep Harry Potter the way it is in my mind and what it did for me. So I'm just like, but yeah, it's not a good look, because it, like, there's supposed to be death of the author, and you feel like you don't have that if the author keeps coming back and putting her prints all over the blueprint she left for her readers to like go wild with. So that's definitely something that, like, as an author, do not aspire to.
It's a little bit like Star Wars, because
Yeah.
another fandom that I was hugely a part of when I was younger. But like the greatest thing about Star Wars, before they kind of scrapped all the extended universe novels, was that like every possible minor character in those movies has like a whole novel about them. And it's like,
I was a huge Mara Jade fan, and I might have cried when like she's no more.
I know, I was so disappointed. But like I loved those, and now that there's like, and also the thing that I find that we're all just collectively trying to figure out is the ownership the fans feel over the property. Like the whole backlash people felt about this new trilogy, I enjoyed them. I have some problems with some of them, but I genuinely enjoyed them. But it's this ownership and this like idea that this is the only right way. And I was like, that's not really the point. The greatest thing about Star Wars was it felt like that universe was large enough to contain all these stories. And it no longer feels like that. It's the same thing with Harry Potter. I was like, she is making this world that I loved, that felt enormous and that felt big enough to include people like me, starts feeling smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And I hate it.
Yeah.
It's not as fun to play in anymore. So I try to stay out of meddling in my own work or talking about my own work publicly in that way.
I think that's those are all really good points. When I was younger, I was definitely one of those kids. I would write letters to like my favorite authors or like my favorite celebrities. I would like write them and then I give them to my mom, and she'd have to figure out where to send them, or like lie to me, I guess, and be like, I sent it. But she definitely sent some, because I did get letters back. And it made me really excited because I loved that, the one-on-one interaction of that, like outside of like just interacting with this thing that I knew other people were also interacting with. Like this letter and this correspondence was just us. And like it felt really special to me as a fan. So then when I stepped into the author persona and saw how it was for people online and how social media is kind of like increasing access to authors, I thought about it a lot. I actually really, really enjoyed your podcast episode, JJ, on Pub Crawl, where you talk about the difference between a writer and an author persona and how those are two completely different things. It was the first time I'd ever heard someone separate the two, like the artist versus the brand. And it clarified a lot for me, which was, so thank you.
I had a lot of thoughts.
But it was good because I think like as a newer author, I felt a huge responsibility. And because it's such a new thing that readers are able to interact directly with authors, it's like only in the past like few years that it's been happening like to such a huge scale that it is. There's not really a lot of precedent for it. Like if someone tags you in a review, should you reply? Should you like it? Should you retweet it? Like if like someone tries to DM you and you're not sure if they're like a teenager or an adult, like should you interact with them? Like, is that safe? Is that right? Like those types of things are questions that are coming up more and more now. And like it stressed me out really, really hard because I do feel like there is a responsibility. But I will also say that like one of the things I look to is that obviously I was a fan before I became an author. So like now I am meeting a lot of my heroes. And I think to myself, like, would I be mad? Like as a fan, like, am I expecting them to like go out of their way to talk to me? No, of course not. Like I'd love it if they did it, but if they didn't, I would understand. And so that's what I'm hoping too for my readers, is that they would understand like, a lot of my time is being taken up writing the books that they're reading and doing the behind the scenes work and making sure that I can like pay my bills and make a living and interacting with my loved ones. So it gives me a good perspective.
I'm really wishing that I had the courage to write to some of my favorite authors when I was a kid now, because it never even really occurred to me. There were so many books that I loved in my childhood. But the author was kind of just always this picture on the back cover. Yeah, not like a real person that had any social media presence or anything, like an email address. And I never ever thought about writing to them. So actually now, like as an author, when I do get messages sometimes, like it's really meaningful, but I have to say some of my favorite ones are the ones where they thank me for writing about writing Asian stories. And every time I get one of those being like, oh, thank you for like, I recognized this legend in your book, like the Cowherd and the Weaver or like the Sun God. And it makes my heart sing a little bit because I don't talk about it too much. I've mentioned it in a few panels, but like when I was a composer and trying to make my way in LA to become a film composer, like a couple people had told me before, there's no way you're going to make it in Hollywood because you're Asian. And not only are you Asian, but you're a girl. And that was one of the feelings, my anger was one of the feelings that actually sparked the beginning of Spin the Dawn, where Maya Tamarin, the main character, is trying to become an imperial tailor, and she's basically told that she can't do it because she's a girl. Like I took out the Asian part of it because it's a fantasy world, but the feelings were there. And so now when like readers talk to me about that, like how they're so excited to see more Asian representation in YA now, it just makes me so happy.
That's true.
Yeah. So I think we're doing our part, guys.
Yay!
I think this is a good place to maybe wrap up. So why don't you tell us about your books one more time? Hold them up if you have your props, and then we can sort of wrap things up. Liz, why don't we start with you?
Okay, so my books are Spin the Dawn, and the sequel comes out in July. It's Unravel the Dusk. Yay! And there likely will be an announcement about a new series this month. So you guys can stay tuned for that. It's going to be a duology that's a retelling of the Wild Swans fairy tale by Hans Christian Andersen about a princess whose brothers get turned into cranes, not swans, in my imagining.
Oh my gosh, I love that.
So that should be out soon.
Yay, Janella.
So I'm the author of Where Dreams Descend, which comes out August 25th. You can find me at Janella_Angeles, where I'll probably be updating more if you want updates about this book and such. Yeah, exciting stuff.
Yeah, and there's a pre-order campaign. So
there is thank you for reminding me. Yes, if you go on any of my social media, there is a pre-order campaign where if you pre-order, submit a receipt, you'll get a really gorgeous art print that's like a show poster from the book. So really, really exciting.
JJ.
I'm S.J. Jones. I'm the author of Winter Song and Shadow Song, as well as the forthcoming Guardians of Dawn series. No hard publication date yet, but it should be sometime next year for the first book. And there's 4 of them. Each of them is a different fairy tale and also a different girl as the main character. So,
All right, Axie.
My name is Axie O. I'm the author of Rebel Soul and Rogue Heart. And in 2022, The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea. And you can find me at axieo.com.
Yay. And then Kat.
I'm Kat Cho, author of Wicked Fox, and I queued it up because I don't have an arc, but I don't know if you can see that. Whoa, it's too bright. Okay, Vicious Spirits. There.
Ooh, it looks good.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, I did it finally. Okay, which is out August 18th, 2020. What year is it? This August 18th.
A year. What is the time?
But I want Akshaya to tell everyone about her.
Yeah.
book
Yes.
My book. Oh my gosh. So my book is The Ivory Key. I definitely just forgot the name of my own book. And it is a YA fantasy that is inspired by a lot of things. And that will be out in fall of 2021. Yes. And you can add it on Goodreads. Yay.
Woohoo! Awesome. Yay.
Okay, and as a reminder, you can go to asianauthoralliance.com and you can learn more about like the other panels that are happening or have happened, and also go on YouTube and watch the other ones and also learn more about all the panelists' books. Thank you all for joining us, and Yay.
Bye.
Yay.
Bye.
Bye.